you check the exchange rate and you paused for a second, you are not alone. The Naira has moved again, and yes, many Nigerians are talking about it. So what exactly is happening with our currency? Why does it matter to your wallet, your business, and your everyday life? You're watching Explained Nigeria, where we break down the numbers and give the reasons behind them so you get the full picture. Today we're looking at some of the factors that cause the Naira to rise and fall and what it means for all of us.
The first factor to consider is foreign exchange reserves. These are assets held by the central bank in foreign currencies like the US dollar to back up the Naira. How a country manages these reserves can affect the value of its currency. Developing countries like Nigeria tend to hold more reserves than advanced economies, partly to protect against economic shocks. Analysts say that looking at reserves can sometimes predict crises before they happen. For context, the US dollar and Naira exchange rate recently stood at about 1,425 Naira 50 kobo per dollar, according to the latest market figures. A slight movement reflecting ongoing foreign exchange activity as supply and demand continue to shape the Naira's value. Over the past month, the Naira weakened by 0.16%, but over the last 12 months, it's actually gained 6.26%. So even small changes in reserves or dollar supply can move the Naira. And while these numbers look technical, they affect what you pay for imported goods, loans, and even school fees. Another big factor is Nigeria's trade balance and import habits. Nigeria usually runs a trade surplus, largely because of crude oil exports. But at the same time, the country imports a lot of refined petroleum machinery and food products. This creates a reliance on imports, making the Naira sensitive to global market swings. In 2025, Nigeria had massive trade surpluses, about 5.17 trillion in the first quarter, peaking at 7.46 trillion in the second quarter. While this sounds positive, it also highlights a problem. We still import much of what we consume and produce very few finished goods locally. Even as non-oil exports grow, the economy remains vulnerable to oil price changes, and countries like China and India remain key partners. In other words, oil earns us dollars. Our dependence on imports can put pressure on the Naira, whether international prices fluctuate. It's a delicate balancing act. Government policies and fiscal monetary play a major role in currency stability. Large fiscal deficits, inconsistent rules, and how the central bank manages money supply can create uncertainty for the Naira. For instance, Nigeria operates a floating exchange rate, which means the Naira's value is largely determined by supply and demand. High demand for dollars or increased supply of Naira can quickly shift the exchange rate. In 2025, fiscal policy focused on revenue, diversification through tax reforms, prioritized spending on defense, infrastructure, and human debt management to avoid overspending. Monetary policy led by CBN kept interest rates high, 27% late in 2025, to tighten liquidity and control inflation. This helps stabilize the Naira, though it can also make borrowing expensive. So government decisions, from taxes to interest rates, directly affect how much your money is worth. Even a small policy shift can ripple through the economy. Finally, there's economic diversification and growth. Nigeria's heavy reliance on oil makes the Naira vulnerable to global shocks. But a strong, diversified economy with tech, agriculture, finance, and services contributing can help stabilize the currency over time. In 2025, non-oil sectors showed growth and GDP expanded roughly 3.42% thanks to reforms and investment in technology, agriculture, and services. These steps reduce dependence on oil and strengthen the Naira in the long run. Still, challenges remain. Infrastructure gaps, security concerns, and governance issues need attention if Nigeria wants stronger and sustainable growth and a stable currency. Basically, the more diverse the economy, the less the Naira swings wildly every time oil shifts. Growth in other sectors spread out the risk.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Explained Nigeria. You can watch us on our app, available on Google Play Store. You can also follow all our social media platforms, like, share, and subscribe. And remember, if the Naira affects you, and it likely does, staying informed is the first step to making financial decisions. See you next time on Explained Nigeria.